Hey guys, and welcome to episode 16 on the Health Part with Omar. In this episode, I have a chat with Joanna Blythman, an award-winning investigative journalist, where we have a chat about processed food industry, the importance of whole foods, George Orwell, and her experience of her visit to the West Bank in Palestine. Enjoy. Hey Joanna, can you hear me?
Hello.
Okay, 1 second.
Oh, hi.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, is that you, Omar?
Yeah, it's me, Omar. How you doing, Joanna?
I'm okay, I'm very good. Let me just put my phone onto silent
Okay.
airplane. Yeah, I'm fine. How's life treating you?
Yeah, life is okay. There's challenges
Oh God, yes.
there was always challenges. Started this journey like 10 years ago as I got into it, and I just thought, you know what? I love the subject so much, into nutrition and well-being and everything. Let me study it even more. And for me, it's a bit like, hold on a second, this does not sound right, or it seems a bit fishy. Let me investigate, look into it, and then
Yes.
and then
100%.
sorry.
No, I'm just saying that's right. You're right.
Yeah, and I've got two girls now, and I want them, when they grow up, I want them to be more informed and more interested in this subject than me. And that everyone's interested in their own things, but I want them to question things as well and just not take it as, as the information as it is.
I think that's so important. I mean, in food, I think a lot of people have actually start getting really interested in food when they have children, because they feel like we've got this new little person, some new cells, new body, new little health system. Let's try and get it off to a good start. And I think that often starts the questioning of things that we've maybe before not taken for granted. But in general, critical thinking for everything is really almost becoming the biggest skill you need in modern life, because so much of we're fed so many very set narratives, and it's almost like a substitute for thought. And I think it's a very crucial skill to be able to take an argument or a narrative or an explanation and actually hold it up and examine it and think about it and make your own decision about it. So I think you're doing absolutely the right thing.
Thank you so much. And it's interesting you mentioned critical thinking, because a podcast I did a couple of weeks ago that's going to be released in episode 15. It's with a guy who decided to homeschool his kids, and he said there's two. He said, I'm pretty sure, I know for sure, he said two main things that you don't learn in school, which is critical thinking and creativity.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think it's got worse now because of the sort of intrusion of smartphones and computer sort of based learning. I think that's actually sharpened that. And it's really true. I could never have done it. I'm just not, I haven't got the patience. And I would have struggled with the maths, I'll admit. But at homeschooling, I understand why some people make that decision. I can see it more and more why you might think that way.
Yeah, definitely. If you could introduce yourself to everyone, to the listeners who don't know who you are, and what most of your followers around the world know you from.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm a food writer. I've always been a food writer for about 3 decades now. I started off just being really interested in everything to do with food. So obviously eating it, cooking it, restaurants, how foods were produced and so on. And then I think about in the 1990s that I started thinking, there's so much about modern food that is processed now, and it doesn't really bear much similarity to what I recognize as food. Yet we know so little about this. So increasingly, I think then, as well as maintaining my love and sheer sort of delight in the pleasure, the wonderful things of natural food, I decided that I wanted to get to know what was going on behind the scenes of the food industry. So I've written a number of books. The first book I wrote was The Food We Eat, and that was simply helping people distinguish, or hopefully helping people distinguish between what's horrible chicken, what's not brilliant chicken, and what's good chicken. Through every category of food, helping people make good choices. Then I wrote a book which was called Shopped, The Shocking Power of British Supermarkets. And that was about how big food retailing has really taken over largely much of the sort of production base of the food production system in the UK and elsewhere, and what a negative effect that's had on the quality of the food we eat. I wrote a book called The Food Our Children Eat, trying to help people find, easier ways to get their children to appreciate a good, wide, wholesome diet. I wrote another book called Swallow This. This is one of my most recent books. And it was a major investigation of the ultra-processed food industry. So it was really drilling down to a level that no one had tackled at all. And I interestingly see that no one has since. And I think the reason for that is there's so little openness in the modern ultra-processed food industry. They really don't want you to know what they're up to behind the scenes, because, to be honest, you just wouldn't want to eat it if you did. So that's kind of my portfolio to date.
Amazing. And I would like to add, I know I mentioned this to you when I spoke to you on the phone. Like, you are one of my heroes, because in 10 years ago, in 2013, when I was introduced to someone who's talking about natural health and talked about the way of living, and then I did it myself, and I saw a big difference in the way I was feeling. My hay fever went. I didn't have cold or flu at all for 2 whole years as I was following it. And I was like, okay, there must be some truth to a way of living and a way of eating. And then I will set off my way into going into researching and looking at who else is out there that looks into this kind of stuff. And one thing that pops to mind, and I'll never forget it, to be honest, is an interview you did with Dr. McCullough, and it was on YouTube. It was interesting when you get into this kind of stuff, like, not most of the time it's usually American based, like everyone's researching what's going on in America, and I was like, what's happening in the UK? I can't find it. And then there's a blessing in yourself. You came out, you were investigating in all these places. So I wanted to ask, like, how does someone get into what you're doing? Well, I guess the question is, how do you start an investigation? What was your journey into getting into these factories and finding out what is actually going on behind the scenes?
It's really difficult, because the modern ultra-processed food industry doesn't allow access. It does everything to stop you knowing what's going on. So one of the key things, what you would normally do as a journalist, and I was an accredited food journalist for writing for many papers, was you would approach the press office and you would say, okay, I would like to learn more about how this supermarket chain makes its lasagna. Could you take me, could I visit a factory? You get a lot of cagey questions back, like, excuse me, could you tell me more about your investigation, or why you'd want to know that? And in no time at all, it would come back, no, I'm sorry, we're not able to do that. And it's because the excuse that's given is commercial confidentiality, that you might learn something which would be of advantage to that company's competitors. But in fact, it's nothing to do with that. It's just keeping you out, because the less the public knows, the better. So I tried knocking on the front door of a lot of and so on, and I realized that I wasn't going to get anywhere that way.
Sorry, Joanna, it cut out there. You said you knocked on a lot of doors and then it cut off. What were you saying?
Yes. Sorry? Yeah. So I knocked on a lot of the front doors of supermarket chains and food companies and tried to get access, and obviously didn't succeed. So I realized I was going to have to try another approach. And I was going to have to go undercover. So I did manage to get, let me backtrack, Omar. I did manage to get into factories with people doing me a favor, essentially, providing it was on a sort of anonymous basis. So I was lucky, and I did have a couple of industry insiders who would help. But other than that, it involved going undercover. So what I did in the end was I realized that if I approached one of the best ways to investigate the industry I wanted to investigate, which is called the food ingredients industry. These are the companies that supply the people, the companies that make ready meals, sandwiches, make all the processed foods. So it's like their suppliers. So I realized that one of the best ways to get information was to go to their ingredient show. They have a big show yearly where all the food ingredient suppliers basically sell their wares to the processed food industry.
I can imagine it's not cheap either.
No, it was expensive, but that wasn't really the kind of main issue. The main issue was that you have to kind of go through a kind of you have to fill in a form online to sort of show who you are and where you come from, and so you have to have a cover. So I was fortunate in the sense that I had a small company who were prepared to say that I worked for them. I told a white lie, and I managed to get credentials to attend this show, which until I got there, I thought, well, this will be interesting. I'm not quite sure what it would be like. I had attended a lot of food trade shows before, but this was like nothing else I had ever seen. I just wasn't prepared for what I was going to see, because it was just so sort of surreal and futuristic. Two massive exhibition center in Frankfurt, just full of products that all seem to be or ingredients, substances, concoctions, whatever you like to call them, that were used in processed foods we eat regularly, but no one short of a chemist and possibly a biotechnologist, and even then a physicist, might really understand how they were fully produced. And I just remember walking in there and just being amazed, because there was just nothing that said food to me, not food in the sense that I know it. There was no whole ingredient. There was just demonstrations or illuminated displays of colored fluids and strange powders, and lots of bragging from the companies selling them about what this product would do for you. Like, it will make your bread glossier, it will extend the shelf life of your product, it will allow you to cut ingredient costs. So it was a kind of bragging and the sort of functionality of these ingredients to the customer, but absolutely no explanation of how the things were made in the first place. And what I found quite interesting is that when I was wandering around, looking like a customer who might be keen and interested in buying some of their ingredients, I was getting a really, friendly sales pitch. The minute I said, could you tell me a bit more about the production method? Because my customers are quite keen on provenance and they like to know the methods. They said, no, we couldn't answer that. You'd have to contact our head office. And you could see the eyes glazing over, and you're instantly identified as someone who was asking them something they didn't know. I mean, they were just salesmen. They hadn't a clue about the production methods of things. But that really, it just made me realize that the people, the customers of these ingredient manufacturers, the sort of people who are making ultra processed food, they actually haven't got a clue and do not understand in fullness what the ingredients are they're using. And they just take it from the producer that it's fine, it's not a problem, it does what it says it does. And as long as it's useful to them and it improves their profit margins in some way, then they're very happy to buy it. And I did find that quite alarming, that there was absolutely no scrutiny of what was on sale as far as I could see. And of course, all the processed food companies employ people who are called food technologists, and their job is to sort of understand these products. But basically, they're like sort of to them, those sort of people coming from a food technology background, I mean, natural food is just a blank canvas. And the puzzle for them is, how much could you change it, alter it, take it to pieces, put it back again in a novel form with different ingredients and different thises and that's, numbers, additives, processing aids, whatever. How can you put it back together again to make a sellable product? So their objectives are about what the companies call value engineering. It's making a very profitable product at low, with a high margin, low cost. That's really their job. And there's anything like health, taste, it just doesn't come into it. It's like asking someone who fixes your car to talk about cherry orchards. It's just not their domain. And they're actually very, very clever people. They can do all sorts of amazing things in a kind of chemical, physical, biological sense. But there's no sort of overall intelligence guiding it. And I suppose that's what bothers me, because that's when you then start having a situation where we're all, or many of us who choose to eat ultra-processed food, are allowing into our diet a load of products and things that we really haven't a clue about. We're just taking it on trust that it's okay and kind of going with the flow. And you know what, it isn't, because all the research building up now shows that really the higher the consumption of ultra-processed food, the worse health is in the population. And there's just
that's exactly what I want to get into, because let's say if someone comes up to you and says, Joanna, what's the issue with these what's the issues with these chemicals being in there, what's the issue of it being ultra processed? Because look, now I can buy food that lasts long on the shelf. What do you say to those kind of people?
Right. Well, I would say that ultra-processed food is essentially fake food. So one of the first things that's wrong, as I think I said, one of the main objectives of food processing is to reduce the amount of expensive ingredients and substitute something that's cheaper that can be made to have the same effect. So, for example, supposing we take something like an egg custard, inside your donut, or if you make that in the traditional way, you're using eggs, sugar, a little bit of corn flour and milk, whole milk. But if you could make that using tap water, dried milk powder, a modified starch that's been chemically altered to have a certain property, using a whole sort of armory of food technology techniques to change it. And if you could, instead of having it need to taste of eggs and milk, you could just put in a bit of flavoring. Well, you can sell something that purports to be custard, and it really is just nothing like the real thing. So my first reply to your question would be, well, you're getting cheated, because the things that you think are in there, the good things that you look in the label and think, oh, egg custard, that sounds nice. You find it's either got only egg powder, or it's only got 2% egg. It's got a load of modified starch, maybe some gelling agents like agar or carrageenan thrown in there. So you're being conned. The second thing is that we know when we're dealing with natural foods, i.e. whole foods, as nature made them for us, a whole apple, a steak, a piece of broccoli. Nature is a highly, highly intelligent system. She didn't design foods to shorten the lifespan of the human race. These foods in their natural form are good for us. And if you eat those foods, you don't need to get too much in your head about, am I eating a healthy diet? If you mainly eat whole unprocessed foods and largely cook most of it when you can, you don't have too much to worry about. But none of us know we do know in some, there are many signs that it's very, very dangerous, that when you take apart natural foods, you submit them to a number of processes, which might be chemical, physical, thermal, genetic engineering, various techniques that change them, and then you reassemble them in novel forms that people have never eaten before, then it's very likely that those will cause problems. And, we do know that. So, I mean, one of the biggest bodies of science on this, I think, is the science around artificial sweeteners.
Oh yeah, I'd love to go into that, because there was an article, I think, a couple of months ago, where they're talking about how aspartame is linked with can make your cells pathogenic.
Yes. Well, it's just like we're learning more and more. One of the obvious things about artificial sweeteners, and I don't think anyone disputes this now, is they don't help you lose weight. So the whole sales pitch is you can still have this extremely sweet taste, I mean, crazily sweet taste, but, there are no calories attached, so you won't put on weight. Well, there's now a body of science that shows that actually consumption of artificial sweeteners is reflected in weight gain. So, and then, as you say, there are very specific things coming out now about how it can have other very negative effects. We know, or some scientists think, that one of the things about artificial sweeteners is that they actually are, our body just can't handle them, our brains can't handle them. We weren't designed to have them. So what they do is they basically wrong foot or confuse the hormones that regulate our appetite. So hormones, ghrelin and leptin, they should be regulating and controlling our appetite. But when they get whacked with a chemical sugar, which is crazily sweet and has no accompanying calories, then they just can't deal with it. So it's just, I mean, I remember once interviewing someone who was fairly candid about the ultra process industry, and I said to him, I asked him a specific question. I said to him, am I just being a bit paranoid here? Is it actually okay? Is it really not as bad as I think? He said, no, everything you imagine, but all of it. And this is the situation now with the worms, the can of worms that is. Hello?
Hey, can you hear me?
I can now, yeah.
Yeah, the connection was unstable for a sec there. So yeah, you were talking about the artificial sweetener, sorry? You're talking about your friend, or you're basically saying that
you want me to start there?
Yeah, well, you're basically saying that, friend, is it that bad? And your friend said it is?
Yes, it's worse. Do you want me to repeat that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, if you just repeat from the friend story from there.
Yeah, right. I was once interviewing an industry insider, and I said to him, I was asking questions, and I said, I'm sorry to bombard you with questions. Am I just being a bit paranoid here? Am I imagining bad things going on, or things that are really not good for us? And put me right. And he said, no, not at all. You just you don't know that all of it. It's much worse than you thinking. Everything to do with ultra processed food manufacture is a can of worms in so many different respects. And if people really knew, they would be shocked. But they make a good job of keeping it all secret. And that really brought me up sharp. And I think I've seen that since, where there starts with a whisper, a murmur from some scientists and who say, actually, hang on a minute, artificial sweeteners, they're not good for you. And they're dismissed as, oh, no, rubbish. That's not true. There's no evidence for that. And then not very long after 18 months, then there'll be another bit of research and another bit of research. And gradually what you suspected at the beginning is correct. So I'd say to people, don't go around in a fool's paradise thinking I can eat food safely if lots of people buy it in the supermarket and eat it because I've got government looking after me. These big companies are responsible. They care about me and my health. Just don't believe it. Look after your own health, make your own decisions on the basis of your critical thinking, and listen to the people who are actively discussing and researching the subject. You don't need to believe everything they say, but you do need to listen to it and evaluate it for yourself.
Definitely. I think having an open mind is key in these kind of situations and this kind of subject, especially critical thinking.
Well, if someone says to me, can you give me a good, simple example that I can understand of what's wrong with some of the modern ultra food processing ingredients? I often give the example of rosemary extract. Now, if you were buying a product and it might be a pizza, or it might be, a pie or a sandwich or whatever, it could mean many things. And you look at the label, supposing you're one of these people who reads the ingredients label and you think, rosemary extract, oh, that doesn't sound too bad, does it? Rosemary is a lovely thing, fragrant, grows in the garden.
It just sounds peaceful.
It sounds lovely, doesn't it? An extract has got that feeling of high quality sort of production, the sort of people who make essential oils would extract something from, so you feel quite sort of cool and relaxed about that. But essentially, rosemary extract is what is known as a clean label preservative. So clean label is trying to make highly techno ingredients sound nice. What it does is its role is as a preservative. It is a dark brown color. It comes out of a bottle. It doesn't smell of rosemary. It doesn't taste of rosemary. It's been extracted often using solvents, so harsh chemical solvents, to get it out of a pile of probably what was, to start with, dried rosemary, not fresh rosemary. So basically using this extremely brutal solvent extraction method, you get this brown liquid from rosemary, which will then be useful as a preservative in processed food. And what that will do is allow a longer sell-by date. So, there's the person thinking, oh, rosemary extract, lovely, and they have not got a clue. And who can blame them for knowing what's been done to that product, that it's not good. And it's actually a sign that of the manufacturer trying to make the product appear fresher than it really is.
Wow. And imagine consuming solvents on a daily basis in small amounts. Like I can imagine people saying that it's not toxic because you eat it and it's fine, but over time it's going to have a health effect, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the whole basis of the regulation of food additives and also pesticides is based on yes, we accept that there are toxins in it or could be present. However, in the end product, they're at such a low level that we have made a calculation that won't harm your health. And they're all studied in isolation. So, they don't ever look at the cocktail effect, or actually a group of scientists have persistently tried to look at the effect of the cocktail effect of various additives and so on in the diet. Guess what? They don't get the research, the grants for that. They don't get the money. So it's very, very limited. So, I mean, what we have is a situation where the potential risk is looked at in isolation. No one sat down and thought, right, okay, you have someone, I think most people in Britain now have at least 50% of their diet is in that ultra processed food category. So really, some sage government department or advisor should have been sitting down thinking, okay, if all these trace elements of solvents and various processing aids and all these additives come together in this kind of oil and that kind of modified starch, what kind of effect is that going to have on the human body? They won't do it. It'd be impossible to tell, because the disaster of processed food is just lost in the population. There's no way of proving conclusively that one ingredient is terrible for real people. But what we do know is that we just need to use our eyes and our gut instinct and say, if you eat a lot of that kind of food, you're not eating a healthy diet. And over time, that will have consequences, serious consequences for your health.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I try to get that message out as much as possible. But it's interesting how the human mind works, because where a lot of the population is used to eating a certain way, eating a certain way, living a certain way, and when you introduce change, it doesn't taste as good, does it? At the start.
No. I think there's we kind of bumble along in a kind of safety in numbers frame of mind, which is, everyone else is eating this, loads of people take this, the label on the packet tells us it's good for us and so on. Well, people wouldn't lie, would they? And we want to go along with it because, who wants to be a sort of detective having to sort of analyze everything you eat all the time? You can't do it. But one of the things I often find is helpful to do is to look at other countries, because I find that the Anglosphere, so I think we're talking America, UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand,
Yeah.
they're countries that are particularly serious problems with food and obesity. And really, a lot of that is to do with this snacking, ultra processed food pattern kind of eating. If I'll give you an example. In Britain, it's quite common for workplaces to time a meeting for 1 o'clock lunchtime. And what you'll see is people on Zoom are in the office and they're eating a not very good sandwich, or, they're starving because they didn't have lunch. The whole concept of lunch has been subverted by the sort of work culture. That's not true. If you go to places like Italy, France, Portugal, you don't see that. On the whole, you don't see people eating food in the street, not regarded as very, it's not good. The Italian will talk about la bella figura, looking good, and eating a burger in the street is not la bella figura for any Italian person.
Wow.
And so on. And I think that we're quite different, and we tend to be inside this sort of Anglosphere, and with a particular attitude to food. And although I think there are other, ultra processed food are rife, throughout the world, but we do in this zone have a particular sort of addiction to them. One example would be the consumption in the UK of crisps. There are massive aisles. There's a crisps aisle,
Oh my gosh, yeah. We went to Tesco last night and just got into this crisp bar, you're right. Like there's so many different options from different companies, different flavors, different shapes, different sizes, baked. What else are there? They do vegetable crisp now, which was interesting. But that's cooked in sunflower oil. So I'd like to see what you think about that. When they have now quote unquote healthier options in terms of crisps. Now you have like crisps cooked in sunflower oil, but they're vegetables based. So what do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting you should ask me that, because I was looking at a product, I won't name it, I was as part of my research, which is a sort of might be represented or come over as a healthy alternative to crisps for children. It's very clearly pitched at children. And I had a look at the ingredients, and basically what it is a pile of starch modified from potatoes. So that's highly chemically altered starch, bound together with oils. Now they specify rapeseed and sunflower, but these are highly processed oils. They're known as RBD oils, refined, bleached, deodorized. So that means they've been through a really industrial refining process, just as you would do for petrol or something like that. So that's been mixed with powders, and the powders, they, give the names of vegetables, and that always makes people think, if there's a name of a vegetable on the label, that must be healthy. But essentially, the powders are just there as colorings. And I had a look at the sort of the fat level in these products, and I should make clear that I don't think that fat is bad for you, providing it's not refined. If it's fat in its natural state, I don't have a problem. But the oil in this product, there's actually more in it than a packet of crisps. But I could see that a lot of really, well-intentioned parents would probably pick this up and think, oh, this is a healthier snack. I mean, the point being that, you stroll down the aisles of a French or Italian supermarket, you won't find it that easy to find crisp, to be honest. So in Britain, we're in a particularly sort of
Snack
culture. Yeah, and a snack culture. We with any encouragement, will skip meals, not sit down to eat, not sit down around a table. All the sort of cultural, social things about eating together tend to be downgraded in Britain, and I mean, I think that one of the great things about traditional eating patterns, and by that I mean 3 meals a day or one major meal where everyone sits down together, whether it's in the Middle East or in whatever country you're talking about, this sharing of food is really important to give us the time to sort of feel that we've eaten well. And it encourages good eating patterns because children just learn to eat what their parents are eating. There's no staggered meal times. Everyone sits down together. So if you're eating falafels and tahini and 6 different salads is normal for your parents, then you're gonna end up eating the same things. Our problem here now is that for a long time now in the UK, we've actually had 3 categories of food in sort of the average shopping basket. And, one is the adults' food, one is the children's food, and one is the pet food. And often the pet food is arguably healthier.
Yeah. My cats eat raw chicken, and I gave her beef liver last night, and she was loving it. And I'm like, and I'm eating it as well, but my kids will not touch it. My wife will not touch it. And I get it at the beginning. If you're not accustomed to that taste, it does have a distinguished taste to it. But for me, it's like, bloody hell, like beef liver has literally every nutrient in there that I would need. So it only makes sense. Like my cat is all over it. But yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that there are categories in the basket. That's true.
And I think it's this sort. But again, it's just not a good eating pattern. And I think this sort of separating out, and it also makes us different sorts.
100%. I totally agree.
Different sorts of consumers, from a marketing point of view, right? Let's target the parents who fret about their children not eating well. We'll tell them it's healthy when it's not. Okay, design that product for them. Oh, let's target the busy young people who haven't got anywhere much to cook and don't eat on their own. Let's, devise a lot of products for them. It's just breaking us down into categories of consumers that can be marketed in a never-ending stream of ultra-processed food. And
divide and conquer comes to mind.
Divide and conquer, yeah. And I mean, I say, I hate to sort of be too simplistic, but I think we all like some sort of candor. Essentially, the food advice people need is avoid processed food, cook as much as you can, sit down to eat a meal, preferably with other people, but even if you're on your own, do sit down, enjoy it, don't snack, and try to keep your eating during the day. Don't eat too late at night. Try and finish eating relatively early so your metabolism can sort of coast along throughout the night without doing too much hard work. That is basically all you need to know about food, if it really comes down to it. I think this is the whole problem with ultra processed food, is that it doesn't fit any of those bills. We don't know what's in it. We don't prepare it. We eat it mindlessly. Those companies make a load of money out of us, and we are all getting fatter and less healthy as a result.
Definitely. And I should ask you at the beginning, actually, just for the listeners out there, what is the difference between a natural food, a processed food, and an ultra processed food, for those who have no idea?
Yeah, well, interestingly, though, there's a great scientist, a group of scientists in Brazil, led by a professor, Carlos Monteiro, and he actually designed a system. It's a 4-tier system, regarded, which is sort of breaks down processed foods into various categories. And for anyone who's really interested, look up that NOVA classification of food. But for me, it's pretty simple. Natural food is a food in its whole form. So let's think of something like celeriac, a whole celeriac with green bits sprouting out the top, still in its skin. That would be whole unprocessed food. Processed food might be, in my mind, something like yogurt or cheese. So it has been processed. It isn't just milk. It has had cultures added to make it either into cheese or yogurt, whatever. So in that sense, it has been processed, but the processing can be, not always with a product with like yogurt, but can be quite straightforward, and it's not something that I'm unduly concerned about. People have been fermenting milk and preserving meat and so on for centuries. I'm not concerned about that kind of traditional processing. And then we come to the ultra processing, and that is when you basically approach ingredients as a sort of matrix. You break it down in a number of ways: chemical, physical, thermal, just sheer weight. You crush it, all sorts of things to change it, and then you reassemble it. The various components you've extracted in new forms that we've never eaten before. That to me is ultra processed food. I think it's kind of obvious that if you avoid the extremes of ultra food processing, you can eat a very nice and very interesting diet. You can enjoy food. You're not missing out. If anything, you're just getting more good food. But those ultra processed foods really are not contributing anything to your well-being.
Exactly. And that's the thing that I talk about with my kids on my posts on Instagram, because that's where I'm mainly on. Another thing that worries me, and I'm seeing it happening before my very eyes, what I've noticed is, like, you mentioned. Sorry, you mentioned categories earlier, but there seems to be categories not just in our trolley basket, but also categories of things like, first it was like conventional produce, organic produce, and now we're gonna have GMO produce. And this seems like, to me, what I'm seeing in my head is like these things are gonna be in section, and people are like, well, I'm better off getting the conventional produce compared to the genetically modified produce because it's better than that. And then then there's people who, and it comes, and there is a cost to this kind of stuff as well. There's a price difference that's where they grab us, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. On organic, I've always been a huge fan and supporter of organic food, because basically, who wants to eat food laced with residues of pesticides? It clearly isn't a good thing. That said, I am fairly selective. There are certain organic products I would never dream of having anything but organic. So that would probably be things like carrots, flour, various things like that. But I'm not going to split hairs. So if I come across a farmer who says, "Look, I've got these great Jersey cows. I don't spray pesticides or fertilizers on the grass. They're out there, and I sell them milk. I don't happen to have organic certification because I can't afford it. But do you want to taste my milk?" I'm going to say, "Yeah, of course." So
is that raw milk?
Yeah, I am a big fan of raw milk. Actually, I am lucky that I live near enough to a farm that produces raw milk, and that's what I
so
drink.
lucky. That's amazing.
And well, the thing about the milk is it comes in glass bottles. You have to buy the bottle, fine. And then it has this head of cream on it, the top of the milk, because it hasn't been homogenized. Homogenization is quite a brutal process, which sort of distributes the fat particles evenly throughout the milk. So you don't get that head of cream on the top. And then it's been also pasteurized often, which is again another extreme heat treatment, which changes milk. So when I get the milk that I buy, it's fabulous. It's just glorious. You get this head of thick, lovely cream, the whole viscosity of the milk. It's rich. You can have a glass of that and think, I know that's doing me good. And then you see the sort of supermarket equivalent, which is in a plastic carton, watery because it's had the fat removed from it. It's been homogenized. It's been pasteurized, and it's just like white water.
Yeah, definitely. Like, especially like my kids, like in schools, they give little carton boxes of semi-skimmed pasteurized milk, and the teacher saying, "Oh, this is healthy. Everyone have a free milk carton." And I'm like, "Kids, what fat soluble vitamins are in that? I'll get you the milk from the farm at home."
Yeah.
And I'm quite lucky as well. I don't have a farm near me, but there's a guy who lives pretty much 10 minutes away. He goes to the farm in Leicester and he gets loads and puts it in his freezer boxes in his car, and he sells them all to the local area.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot more of that now, people sort of setting up their own little supply networks. And on the question of children, I find that children are really smart. It's actually quite hard in one way it's easy to con children because they're little, but often they'll just ask you a really piercing question and they'll really catch you out. So I'm a real believer in constantly explaining to children why you're doing things and why maybe everyone else's parents don't make them do that, but you do it, and just explaining it to them. And I think I've come out, my children are grown up, and I can see that they, like me, love good food, know what it is, and spend time preparing it. And their children will learn that from them. So it's really important not to give in. There's this sort of, I think it's actually a bit sort of lazy acceptance amongst a lot of parents. Well, everyone's doing it, and what can you do? You don't want to make
and you know what? It's interesting you say that, because like it's hard to explain that way of thinking without them being offended or being very offended, and they're trying to see it as an attack. Where it's like, let's just start thinking about the well-being of our child.
But you see, this is the thing. A majority of people just want to go along with what other people do, and they don't want to think a whole lot.
They want an easy life, don't they?
Yeah, and I've come to, even not even say an easy life, because in a way that's sort of judging them. I think it's almost that they just feel out of their depth, and the combination of this is too difficult, and they're out of their depth. They just don't bother. And what I notice now, so I come to the conclusion that sort of it's about 20% of the population. On any subject, on any topic, I think there are probably about 20% of the population who really are interested in critical thinking and doing their own thinking and working out their own path. The other 80% are happy to go along with what they consider to be the advice of, the food industry, the Food Standards Agency, government committees. And I think that's probably just what we work with. But the fact is that the sort of who I would see as the active 20% really are interested in food. And I find now, particularly amongst younger generations, I see a lot of interest in food. And once you pointed out certain things to them, they're really prepared to take it on board. Whereas I think a lot of older people just feel a bit, well, can't be bothered, a bit cynical. I've got to this stage, I'm not going to change now. So I'm quite hopeful. I think that recently there's been for some strange reason, I don't know why, because I've been talking about this and other people have for decades, but there is a real sort of movement concern about ultra processed food.
Yes, there is a big one. I think there's a guy who's like a scientist, and he's been on TV, and he's actually written a book about it. I can't remember his name. He's got like a Dutch kind of name, Von something.
Van Tulleken, Chris Van Tulleken.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, and he's just released a book, and I've just seen that recently. I was like, oh, that's interesting, because they're like going into it and how the corruption and how it all works and why have we gotten to this place in the first place.
Yes, exactly. So I think there is this appetite for among some people, and that's fine, because at any point in time you need people. There are people just going along with the status quo, and then the ones who change it, or at least decide that they want agency over what they eat. And I feel that's the really important thing that I see. People who are really interested in food want more control. They want to know, they want to be in charge of their health. And I think for them, therefore, going along with what everyone else does isn't an option.
Yeah, definitely. Ever since the pandemic finished or started, George Orwell's name keeps popping up.
Yeah.
And even when we had a chat a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned it as well. And in your book, you mentioned a quote from George Orwell. He basically said that, what did he say? He said something about that a tin of food is deadlier than a machine gun, and that's what he said.
Yes.
So if you could first tell me, who is George Orwell, because I'm interested in starting to read about him. I downloaded it on Amazon Kindle. There's a free the Orwell 1984. I think that was his book, I think, or maybe it's someone else written it based on him.
Yes.
They've given out for free, so I've downloaded it and I haven't read it yet. If you could just tell me, who is George Orwell?
Well, yeah.
I heard his name so many times. I was like, all right, okay. This guy looks like he can predict the future by the sounds of it, or a future that's already planned, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you do hear people referring to George Orwell a lot, and he kind of has almost had this spooky sort of ability to sort of predict the future. He was, of course, the English author and journalist who wrote some sort of groundbreaking books, which have really influenced people. Animal Farm, 1984. But the George Orwell had something to say about food. And in his book, The Road to Wigan Pier, which he wrote in 1937, he talked about the impoverished processed food diet of the English working class. And he came up with this quote, which really resonated with me. And he said, "We may find in the long run that tinned food is a deadlier weapon than the machine gun." And I think obviously tinned food was what passed then in the 30s as what we would now call ultra processed food. But I think he's right in the sense that this ultra processed food does have the capacity to kill us and to really have a wholly negative effect on the health of the human race. I mean, it already is done. It already has done. So, I mean, Orwell really did predict a lot, and it's very worthwhile reading Orwell's books now. It is spookily relevant.
And not just food, just the way the world is run as well, I guess.
That's right, yeah.
Interesting.
Absolutely. For very many reasons for rereading George Orwell. Another one is the whole thing of the Ministry of Truth, which is all about lies. So the equivalent of that in processed food would be saying something like good for you, or contains 1 of your 5 a day.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Low in calories, high in protein.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the high in protein labels, and I'm looking at the back. It's like probably like 3 grams or something like that.
Yes. Well, most people just do take things on trust. And what's really interesting, if you look at, supposing you've got the eyesight that you can actually read a product label carefully, the back of a bottle or a packet. There are the back of the packet is covered by law. So by law, you can't actually lie about the ingredients, although you can use lots of weasel words to make them sound better than they otherwise would.
Can you give me a list of weasel words?
Well, weasel words. Well, for example, we come back to good old rosemary extract. I mean, that sounds lovely, doesn't it? And that is simply a preservative. It's what's known as a clean label preservative, i.e., it doesn't need to have an E number on the label. So there's nothing to prompt the person who's casually scanning it to think it is a highly processed ingredient. Another one would be mixed carotenes. I mean, mixed carotenes sounds like something quite good for you, because we all know that carotene is good for your eyesight and you get it in carrots. Great. Let's all eat mixed carotenes. That's simply a yellow coloring. That's how it's used. But on the back of a label, you have the ingredients listing and the nutrition table. Now, the ingredients listing, we've discussed it. It is covered by law up to a certain point. The nutritional labeling is also covered by law, but very few people know how to interpret it. So it's fairly useless to most people.
Yeah.
Turn on to the front of the packet and you can just more or less say whatever you want, unless it's a blatant lie. So you can say, that a chewy children's sweet with some raspberry puree, contributes to 1 of your 5 a day. You can use all sorts of buzzwords like no artificial colorings, no artificial flavorings, low fat, to create a sort of aura of health and greenness around the product, which it absolutely doesn't earn.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like especially the low no artificial sweeteners and additives, but it's high in sugar. I guarantee you that much, and everyone just forgets that.
Right. Yeah, well, that's right, but it's also distraction, isn't it? It's the red herring, so we latch on to certain things, and give us confidence, and we sort of gloss over the ones we don't understand or that aren't really answered by the label. I mean, another thing that's really shocking about processed or ultra processed food labeling in the UK and around the world is that it's really misleading, like the name of the product. So, for example, if I was to say this is a beef pie, a beef steak pie, and so it will say steak pie with Guinness and Chantenay carrots or something like that, and you think, oh, that sounds really good. Then you turn around to look at the ingredients and you find that, guess what? There's only 13% steak in it. And even that is actually not steak. It just says beef. And then you've got a lot of modified starch and flavorings and fake umami type flavorings that give a savory taste. And then you've got piles of flour and carb because most of it's pastry and there's not a lot of meat. So this is one of the very sort of misleading. That's quite no one will say, there's something wrong with, you have to describe this as a water flour pie with a little bit of steak in it. No regulatory body is going to trouble the manufacturer over that. But it's just disappointing because if you follow the picture on the box and you think, yeah, I'm really busy tonight. Oh no, I don't want to cook again. What can I get? Oh, that sounds really nice. And you look at the picture, you get home and then you take this awful thing out the box and you look at it and think, this just doesn't look like it's more like a budget airline ready meal. It just doesn't appeal. And so it is a terrible disappointment, I think. Particularly all the ready meals and the things you just sort of pop in the microwave. And I think it's low on highly nutritious ingredients. And that's one of the reasons why you often find that people sit down to eat what seems to be a fairly healthy ready meal or something. But then, half an hour later, they're thinking, I just want something sweet now. I really... I wonder what else could I? Oh, maybe I'll just have that, or a can of something. And I think that sort of constantly eating but never quite satisfied is another example of the sort of British sort of malaise around food that the food we're eating and we're relying on, ultra processed food, it's just not that satisfying. So when you sit down, I'll guarantee that if I invited you around, I said, right, Omar, I'm going to just cook you a straightforward Sunday lunch. So we're having lamb, potatoes, we're having about 3 or 4 vegetables, we're going to have nice gravy made with rosemary and so on. And you had that, you would really feel satisfied. You walk out and think, I don't need to think about food, for hours now. But if I give you a sort of ready-made, ready meal roast dinner in a box and said, here you are, Omar, eat it there while I'm doing something else, it just wouldn't satisfy. You'd be hungry.
Yeah, definitely, because it's nutritionally dead. There's hardly any nutrients in there.
That's right.
It's processed in such a way where your body doesn't realize it. Most likely, it's an anti-nutrient as well. Your body's trying to get all the nutrients that you already have, trying to recover whatever it can from what you're eating. Interesting enough, I had this conversation with Dale Pinnock, the medicinal chef, in episode 14.
Yeah.
We spoke about exactly the same thing. We just said, like, stick to whole foods. These are foods that your body knows and wants. And once you get into a role of eating those kind of foods, you'll feel fuller because that's what your body wants. It doesn't want all this Frankenstein foods that it has no idea what to do with it.
That's absolutely right. And I think more and more, there's an interesting strand of research, or more of a strand, a field of research now, which is into satiety, satiating the appetite. And it's clear that macronutrients, protein, fat, really do satiate your appetite. And they keep, what my grandmother used to call, they'll keep you going for longer. So you always have something, when I was small, you always something that will keep you going, properly keep you going. Carbohydrates don't generally, and including fruit and vegetables, which are carbohydrates, don't have that same effect. And ultra-processed food, which has been denuded of, its healthy macronutrients and all the associated micronutrients that are naturally present in whole foods, just doesn't satisfy us. And the brain, I think we're animals, we're programmed to, look after ourselves and to seek out nutritious food. So we have difficulty dealing with that food. There's a farmer in Wales who did a very funny experiment one day. And what he did, he has all these puppy dogs, farm dogs. And so he gives them sort of fake meat, fake ultra processed.
I think I know who you're talking about. He's on Instagram as well. But yeah, he got like a million subscribers or something recently. So
yeah,
I think it's him.
Yeah. Well, so he gives the dogs, he puts down real meat, and then he puts down the stuff that's made to look like meat. And of course, the dogs take one sniff of the fake stuff, and they go right for the meat. And he's done the same thing with, whole milk and so-called plant milk. Kittens don't want anything to do with it, because their little brains are already telling them, hey, this isn't good for you. This stuff is the good stuff. And I think another interesting sort of, we did see, and I think it's kind of peak now, but I think we've kind of gone through peak vegan and peak plant-based, because what we're beginning to realize is that the most nutritious foods are essentially livestock or from animal source foods. And that if you eliminate them from your diet, or even cut them down to a large degree, your body is going to struggle to get that same nutrition. And it doesn't matter if you have a group of sort of food technologists who are sort of putting together a whole lot of clever ingredients that they've made by unknown methods. They cannot simulate and trick your body into believing that this is as nutritious as real food.
Yeah, just like powdered milk for babies. Like, I saw a documentary on Channel 4, and they're basically saying, like, there's no way they can mimic mother's breast milk. There's no way. They tried, but they can't do it. It's interesting you mentioned about livestock, because I have a lot of female clients, and the common issue with female clients is iron issues. So, oh, how much red meat do you eat? And they'll go, hardly any. So, and I was like, well, that's probably the easiest source of iron you could have instantly. And there's a thing about, I don't like the taste. But I was like, just have a little bit. Then you won't have to spend all this money on supplements. You're getting real food. Your body will appreciate it. Your mind will be more clear, and all the rest of it. So, it's interesting that you mentioned about livestock. That is, it's such a big thing, eating real food. What top 3 tips would you give for people who want to stay away from ultra processed foods?
My 3 tips are just avoid anything that looks ultra processed. And ultra processed is anything that you don't understand what it is exactly, what the ingredients are in it. Just don't buy that stuff. I would say cooking is just
that's an amazing answer. Cooking seems, I think, because we're in such a fast-paced world, every day by day, actually. Cooking has kind of been a forgotten issue, and people are just going for the frozen oven chips, the frozen foods, just stick it in the oven and that's dinner ready.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the thing about cooking is that people who cook from real ingredients tend to do understand because they're tasting it, what real food is, and they get to enjoy it. So when you get a pile of ultra processed pap, you actually just don't want to eat it. It doesn't hit the spot. And for people, I understand 100% understand people who say, I'm really short of time, I just don't know how to cook and it's easier for me. But what I would say to them is, look, none of us really want to have to brush our teeth twice a day, and but we do it, don't we? Because we know that if we don't, we're going to have black crumbly teeth and we're going to spend a fortune at the dentist, and we don't want to do that. So, cooking, or at least being, even if you can't cook, buy good quality ingredients, just buy good ham from the butcher, a good bit of cheese, a decent bit of butter, a few cherry tomatoes, that is better than putting yourself in the hands of the ultra processed food industry, who do not have your health at heart. And I think the third tip I would say with people is, I don't think it's a good idea to get too cerebral about food, to get too sort of neurotic about it now. And I like to think that, for all that I'm someone who, has thought intensely, deeply researched very technical aspects of food, I've never lost that love of food and eating and pleasure. And I don't, on the whole, believe in good ingredient, good, bad. Certain macronutrients are good, certain ones are bad. I think just follow the sort of traditional eating patterns of wherever you are, and they tend to be healthy. And, the reason that, they've endured over millennia is because they've kept people alive and healthy. So try and connect with the sort of cultural eating habits in your zone or country or your area. Get in touch again with natural production, when the seasons are, eat seasonally, and never ever lose that joy of food. And just think of ultra processed food as a gang of very untrustworthy, profit-driven companies who are trying to rob you of the pleasure of eating, real pleasure, as opposed to fake and contrived pleasure. And then I think you're not going to fall for the sales pitch of the ultra processed food industry.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So I've got a quick bonus fire round. So it's going to be quick questions. I want your first answer that comes to mind. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. I'm not good at these, but when you go.
All right, I'll be quick as possible. Chicken or beef?
Beef.
Kale or broccoli?
Broccoli.
Celebrity crush?
Elizabeth David.
What's the best age?
39.
What are you going to have for dinner tonight?
Tonight, I'm going to have a lasagna that my husband has made, and he makes his own pasta, and very good, wonderful, slowly cooked ragu, made with sofrito vegetables in the traditional sort of Italian way. So I'm going to be having that. I'm going to be having a nice glass of Nebbiolo wine, and possibly a green salad, and that will be it for dessert. Probably some clementines.
Nice. Texting or talking?
Talking.
Superpower of choice?
If I could have a superpower.
Yeah, superpower of choice.
I mean, what could I do if I could?
Could be flying, could be running really fast.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Superpower would be to have a craft like making leaded glass or gilding or shaping leather, something.
And making something out of nothing.
Yeah, making something out of nothing, and having the skill and know how to do that. I really appreciate people who have artisan skills. So, in Italy, the people who kind of keep the cheesies and turn them lovingly so that they get just exactly the right kind of maturation and mold. Those people who keep those craft skills going. I'd love to be like that.
Okay, brilliant. Guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure. I don't really have one. I mean, I can eat quite a lot of good dark chocolate, but then I just don't enjoy anything that's less than 70%. And I quite often, that my standard chocolate would be about 80, 85. So I can, at the end of the day, when I'm relaxing, I think, oh, a couple of squares of dark chocolate would be quite nice, but that's really it. And other than that, I'm not guilty about any of my pleasures. I mean, I love a ripe peach. I absolutely adore, the first asparagus, the crackling on roast pork. All those things are, to me, very legitimate pleasures. On my deathbed, I've sometimes thought that I do have a bit of a weakness for a really good croissant if it's only made with butter. And there's a very good patissier near where I live. He's French and he makes excellent croissants. And I have to say, I do have to restrict my consumption there. But the main thing about the croissants is those crunchy little spiky ends. So as I die, I'd really like someone to be feeding me all the ends cut off a load of freshly made croissants. I think I would die happily.
That's an interesting question, actually. I might ask for future guests, like, what would be your dying wish be as a meal? So thank you for that. Best place you have ever visited to date?
I've been so lucky to, as part of my career, been to so many places. I've been to the Windward Islands in the Caribbean to see bananas being grown, fair trade bananas. I've been to Darjeeling to see tea being picked and produced. And then I've just done a lot of traveling. Italy is always a sort of wonderful country to go because Italians really, really understand food. But I think that if I had to pick one, the place that I find endlessly fascinating, would never tire of, is Istanbul in Turkey. I once went to Istanbul with all the family. We took Christmas to Istanbul. We just dropped Christmas and we decided to go, and we ate out in all the fabulous restaurants, from the very simple little places on the Bosphorus that are that give you a mackerel sandwich, to quite complex food. In Kadikoy, we went to a restaurant called Chia. I think you pronounce it, or maybe Shia. And the man who owns that specializes in keeping all the old traditional Turkish dishes in production. We had things like squid, not squid. We had quins stuffed with lamb baked. We had beautiful with almonds and chicken cooked in a clay pot. So for me, Istanbul's probably, if I have to go to one, that's where it's going to be.
Interesting, yeah, because we're looking to book Turkey for next summer. So I've been in Istanbul. I loved it. It's the first time I've been to Turkey, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the bazaars as well, and like haggling with the first time I ever haggled, and I was like, wow, this is actually fun, and willing to haggle with me as well. So that was quite interesting. Okay, great. And what advice would you give to your younger self?
What advice would I give to the advice I would give to my younger self is don't be a time waster. At the moment, you think life's boring and you can't be bothered doing things and you're kind of apathetic. But you know what? Don't waste it, because you'll look back and think, my goodness, why did I not put in a bit more then? So I think in some ways, my parents, although strangely they were both teachers, were quite laid back. And in a way, they actually should have said, hey, you know what? Buckle down and work harder and you'll be glad of it. You also realize as you get older just how much you learn when you're young. Your mind is so open, you remember things, you really take things on board. And you don't have that same ability to just soak up information as you get older. So don't waste time. Do absolutely everything you can. Don't listen to any negative person. Spend your time around people who kind of exude a kind of positive energy, who make you feel good, and take it from there.
That's brilliant. That's a brilliant answer, and that advice to your younger self can apply to anyone, and that's why I love it. What does health mean to you, to finish off?
Health means to me control of my life, more control of my life. So all of us in our lives, we can't control that. We don't have enough money. We can't really control that. We can't actually control where we live or who we're responsible for, what we have to do. But a certain extent, taking control of what you eat and your food and health really just gives you a feeling of agency in your life. And I think that's very, very empowering.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. And if it's okay, because before we finish, I wanted to ask about your experience in Gaza, because when I called you last, and I saw a tweet that you did, and I think it'd be quite interesting to hear your experience when you actually went there, because obviously there's so much going on right now.
Right. I should be clear that I didn't get to Gaza. I got to the occupied West Bank. So I was in Palestine. Lucky to be able to travel in Palestine, and that was but in the West Bank. So that's the Israeli occupied West Bank, illegally occupied Palestine. The thing about Palestine is that if you know your Bible, you remember a place that was called Canaan, the land of Canaan, the land of milk and honey. And actually, Palestine is the original land of milk and honey. It's been there since biblical times. And Palestinian farmers are amazing because they just produce the most stunning, high quality products in the most awful circumstances, where they're constantly living under the jackboot of the Israeli occupation. So they produce fantastic olive oil, wonderful extra virgin olive oil. They produce za'atar. Anyone who uses Middle Eastern food will know that deliciously fragrant sort of sesame salt and sort of marjoram dried spread, kind of powder that you put on top of breads and salads and things. Beautiful olives, beautiful nuts. I was lucky to go to Nablus, where I had the best knefe of my life, which was just is a Middle Eastern sweet made with sort of cheese and sticky pastry, stunning. The breads, the markets, the fruit and vegetable output there is amazing. But what saddened me so much was to see what Palestinian farmers had to put up with. For example, during the night, the Israeli settlers, so these are people who have set up illegal settlements in Palestine, in Palestinian territory, will just cut down olive trees, cut down a family's ancient olive trees. This sort of destruction, doing everything to impede Palestinians in general, but farmers just going about their lives. A real apartheid system where, if you're a Palestinian, you cannot travel on the same road as the Jewish settlers. Of course, the massive and monstrous separation wall that's been constructed between Israel and the West Bank. All the checkpoints that mean that if you had, say, an olive, you have olives to press and you have to go to the local mill that's 3 miles, but you might have to drive 15 miles because the checkpoints will make you go in that direction. There's so much challenge for Palestinian farmers, but they really are a fabulously resilient bunch of people, as are the Palestinians in general. I just take my hat off to them.
Wow. And I think in your tweet you mentioned that you were in a UN car, and then they were like banging against the car.
Yes, I was traveling in the course of researching all the food produced in Palestine, I was traveling in a car with Palestinian number plates. So there was me, some colleagues from a British NGO, non-governmental organization, a Palestinian driver, and we had to slow down to come to a roadblock or a checkpoint, which is staffed by fairly young Israeli soldiers with guns, big guns. I'm not an expert in guns, but I can tell you they were terrifying. Submachine guns, I would say. I'm not an expert, but I was scared. But as we were slowed down there, this group of Israeli settlers. So settlers are people who illegally have occupied Palestinian land, arrived at the side of the road, and they started banging on the car window, sort of shrieking abuse, howling at us, spitting. I looked at these people, and I've actually, it was the one time in my life where I thought, do you know, this could turn into a really bad situation. You are actually at some personal risk here. I've never experienced that before, and it just made me feel such sympathy and empathy for the Palestinians who have to put up with this abuse every day in their own land, and the constant encroachment and brutal occupation and obviously in the last 2 months, it's gone up, several gears, even in the West Bank, where there is no Hamas presence, that we're hearing all sorts of attacks on Palestinians by either Israeli settlers or the Israeli Defense Force. So, I just feel and I hope, an olive is like a dove. It's an olive branch is a sign of peace. And I feel that the Palestinians, because of their great resilience, I mean, they've been there for thousands of years, that the spirit of the Palestinian people will never die.
Joanna, thank you so much for your time. We've gone a bit over, but I really appreciate this. And as I said, you're the first people I looked up to many moons ago, and I'm truly honored that we've had this conversation. I'm truly honored also that you followed me back on Twitter. So, what made me follow you back? I was curious about that when you first did it.
Yeah, I don't know. I like to learn. I think you and I have got this in common, that at least that we like, when we see an interesting idea or something, we like to know more about it.
Yeah.
So I thought, here's someone who's saying something really interesting, and maybe you had liked some of the things that I had said, and I often look and think, that's an interesting person. I'd like to hear more from them. So that would be it, Omar.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Right, you enjoy your evening, and once everything's ready, I'll post it up on my Twitter and all the rest of it, and I'm sure you'll see.
Brilliant.
Great. Thank you so much, Joanna. Take care.
Yeah, bye, Omar. Nice to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you. Yeah, bye. Bye.